Welcome to the Lasting Love Connection podcast. I'm your host, Luis Congdon. Today, we're going to be looking at oxytocin. What is it? What does it do? Is it responsible for trust, morality, and love? Paul J. Zak is one of the leading researchers in the United States on the molecule oxytocin. He's the director for neuroscience studies at Claremont Graduate University. He's also a member of the neurology department at Loma Linda University Medical Center. I first found Paul J. Zak's work in an article that he wrote in Psychology Today titled Why Men Cheat. In the article, Paul J. Zak takes a look at why men cheat. Does oxytocin, testosterone, or other brain chemicals have anything to do with it? Is monogamy something that we're socially bred to do, or is it something that we're hardwired to do? His article is a really fascinating look at brain chemistry and how it has to do with trust and social monogamy and sexual promiscuity. From there, I had to follow up and look at his book, The Moral Molecule, The Source of Love and Prosperity. The book was a real in-depth look at why humans tend to be good people and how trust can be built very quickly through this little chemical in the brain titled oxytocin. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it to anybody. In today's interview, we're going to be talking about it, how it impacts you, and how it impacts your relationships with others.
Are you ready for deeper connection, easier communication, or to break old patterns? Well, head on over to lastingloveconnection.com/services and check out one of these customized coaching programs to help you get the results that you really need to help your relationships thrive.
Welcome to the show, Paul. It's great to have you here. So, let's get started. What is oxytocin? What does it do? And why is it important?
So oxytocin was only known until about 10 years ago to facilitate birth and breastfeeding in women. And yet in animals had been shown to allow for the toleration of burrow mates. And so I got very interested in moral behavior for reasons that we can talk about in a minute. But I thought, toleration of burrow mates runs on kind of a continuum to really caring about people and then perhaps even treating them well. So once I heard about oxytocin and read about it, I thought, well, gee, this sounds like an interesting mechanism that might make humans care about each other. So I had this idea, and I, did what most of us do, tried it out with some colleagues, and one of them said it was the world's stupidest idea because everyone knew oxytocin was only for birth. But I said, men make it too. It's not just for women, and there must be some reason why. And this guy said, well, it's like nipples. Men have nipples, but they're not functional, and so oxytocin's the same way. Anyway, I thought different because I'm kind of stubborn, and what we found now is that oxytocin does make us care about complete strangers and behave in pro-social or moral ways. And so I call it the moral molecule because it seems to underlie much of the good behavior we see between people we care about and even complete strangers.
What's really fascinating about what you're saying is that there's an actual molecule or chemical in the body that makes people moral or caring or loving. And I'm just astounded by that because traditionally we tend to think of morality as something that we feel or something that we think about. But what you're saying is that there's an actual part of our brain, our body, that is made to be moral or made to be loving or made to be trusting.
That's right. And so we're certainly biased towards being trusting, people who are in safe environments, who grow up healthy, who are not psychologically challenged. And so we can talk about some of the inhibitors as well. But as you said, it's nice to know there's a chemical involved because chemicals, from an experimental perspective, chemicals are very concrete. I can measure them and I can manipulate them, and we'll talk about how we've done that. But at the same time, it also tells us about how this chemical oxytocin interacts with other factors in the brain to sort of tune up or tune down moral behavior. And I guess, Luis, we should also say for listeners, moral, we should define moral. So moral has no religious or philosophical overlay in the way I'm using it.
Yeah.
Moral simply means the golden rule. So if I treat you in the same manner that I expect myself to be treated, and the golden rule exists in every culture in the country, in the world, then I'm going to call that moral behavior. Now, if I treat you better than I expect myself to be treated, I'll call that a virtuous behavior. And we've seen actually oxytocin motivates also these virtuous behaviors. But moral essentially means pro-social. So I'm reaching out and connecting to people around me in tangible ways.
So for just to help my listeners understand, the golden rule is basically the principle of reciprocity, the that if I treat you well, you will likely in turn want to treat me well. Is that the golden rule?
That's exactly right. And actually, we've also found the reciprocal of that, which is the underlying chemical basis for if you treat me badly, I'm going to treat you badly too.
Hmm.
And we actually need both those sides to navigate through the sea of strangers that we live in. And so I think of oxytocin and these couple other molecules we'll talk about, testosterone and cortisol, as kind of rocket thrusters. So
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly kind of modulating our behavior to the behavior that's going to be most appropriate for the situation we're in. And these mechanisms are really evolutionarily old, so they're generally not open to conscious awareness. And that's why sometimes, say, high stress, for example, inhibits oxytocin release. When you're really stressed out and you're grumpy with the people around you, and then the next day you go, or that night you go, man, I was a big jerk yesterday. How did
Yeah.
that happen? I'm a good person. And then you got to go back the next day and apologize to your spouse or your colleagues, whoever, and say, man, I had a terrible day yesterday and I kind of took it out on people around me. I'm so sorry. I hope you forgive me. So again, it's not that this chemical takes us from 0 to 100. It's that, we're kind of usually going through the world sort of neutral. And when we induce the brain to release oxytocin, or when we manipulate it pharmacologically, we can move you from, say, neutral to, 65. So now I'm going to sort of treat you a little better than I would, expect other people to treat me. So again, it's not like people become sort of automatons or they're gorked out or something. People are very aware of what they're doing. They've just kind of narrowed that self-other divide and giving a little more weight towards the other. And that's a really beautiful thing. It's human beings are basically the only animals that do that regularly and with strangers. And it's one of the amazing things about the human species.
So in your work, I think about your work and a lot of the implications that it has. There's a lot of implications about the imbalances that some people may have of testosterone, like maybe athletes, for example, that work out a lot, or people that have higher levels of oxytocin, or the people blaming it, maybe saying, oh, I just had a bad day, it was the testosterone or the cortisol, or kind of blaming it on hormones sometimes. I would like to get into your research a little bit, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the implications of how stress affects the oxytocin levels. But first, I really wanted to let my listeners understand, on a basic level, what your research was. Can you tell me about your research at UCLA with the trust game?
Sure. So I should say back in the old days, even though now I have a big lab, 35 people, I had no lab, I had no track record. It was just as, I was way off the reservation here. And so I got permission to borrow a lab at UCLA and borrowed a bunch of equipment and put together myself and a postdoc and a graduate student and ran this experiment, which is now called the trust game, as a way to quantify one kind of moral behavior, in this case, why you would ever be trustworthy. So again, you want to start small. Morality is a giant topic, so we started really small, and we didn't want to rely on people's self-reported behaviors because, as you know, we have an incentive, even internally, sort of color what we're doing as a bit better than it might be. So in these experiments, we tempt people with virtue and vice using money because it's a convenient way to quantify what people care about. So here's the experiment. We recruit a bunch of people for this experiment, between 12 and 20 at a time. They get checked in. They get a secret number to mask their identity so they can do whatever they want. No one's going to know. And they're paid cash in this experiment at the end of the experiment by a cashier who's not part of the experiment. They sit in partition computer stations, so they have a huge amount of privacy. And I should say, Luis, we never, ever deceive people in these experiments. We really pay them for this. There's no secret agenda, no hidden cameras. Because we're studying moral behavior, and it would be really bad karma if we would, be deceiving people when we study moral behavior. So here's the task. You log into the computer with your secret number, and you get randomly matched with someone else in the lab. But you don't know who that person is. You can't see him or her. You can't talk to them. Within each pairing of people, there's a first decision maker and a second decision maker. And after lots of instruction and examples and a chance to ask questions, because we don't want people to be confused, the first decision maker gets a prompt by computer saying, would you like to take some of the $10 you've earned for being here, for sitting in these hard chairs for an hour and a half, and give up some of that money and transfer it to the person you've been matched to. So whatever you give up comes out of your account, but gets tripled in the other person's account. So if you give up, say, 8 of your $10, you keep 2, and the other person now has $24. So then the second person gets a prompt by computer saying, person 1 in your pairing sent you $24. The total in your account is 34 because you got 10 for showing up too. Would you like to send some amount back to the first person? So if you think about this task, it's not really clear what to do unless you have some model of human nature. And so this task was invented by experimental economists led by Vernon Smith, who won the Nobel Prize for this work. And the consensus view in economics is that the transfer from person 1 to person 2 is a measure of trust, and the return transfer from person 2 to person 1, which comes out of person 2's account 1-to-1, is not tripled, is a measure of reciprocity or trustworthiness. Give us a really nice task to measure, why people will ever be trustworthy in a one-shot setting when nobody's watching. And in fact, people readily do this. About 95% of people who receive money return some of it to the first person who showed them trust. Of course, we never use the word trust or trustworthiness. We just say money and person. So the question is why? And in fact, economists were really flummoxed on why person 2 would ever return money, because no one's watching and they just assume money is really good. But what economists didn't realize is that, look, when I send you money as person 1, it's not just the money I'm sending you information. I'm sending you essentially a plea to reciprocate with me, a plea to follow the golden rule, which says, look, I sacrificed to help you because you understand this situation. You understand that money can grow by 3, and that's a great deal for both of us. And I hope, believe, trust that you will reciprocate and share some of that largesse back with me. And as I said, 95% of people do that. So what we showed is that the more money you receive as a second decision maker, the more your brain produces oxytocin, and the more oxytocin you have on board, the more money you reciprocate. So this is really big news to me. We have an underlying biology of the golden rule. A couple things wrong with this experiment, potentially. Nothing in the body happens in isolation. So we measure 9 other chemicals that interact with oxytocin. You mentioned a couple of these already, cortisol, testosterone. And we didn't find those had any direct or indirect effect on the behavior or oxytocin release. Second, the second kind of hole in this experiment is that, oxytocin is this very shy molecule. It sort of coaxed out of the brain, and it has a 3-minute half-life. So I don't want to leave that moral lever on too far because I might run into some sketchy guy, and I don't want to behave in a compassionate way to someone who's scary or aggressive. I want to be, get away or fight with them or whatever. So it's a very delicate little molecule. So maybe we're just sloppy, right? Maybe we just blew it. We missed the correct variable, and we got some, randomly happened to get a change in oxytocin. So I knew for the next experiment we have to go in and manipulate oxytocin directly. So these experiments, we got this really big drill, and we drilled into people's... What we did was we got permission to use a nasal inhaler that shoots synthetic oxytocin into the nose, gets into the brain. We had people do this trust experiment again, and we found that compared to people on placebo, those who got oxytocin were not only more trusting with strangers and their own money, they more than doubled the number of people who sent all the money to a stranger. So we have really profound effects. So again, the two halves of this are important. So we showed, number one, that when someone trusts you, your brain releases oxytocin and motivates you to reciprocate. And then if we manipulate that system in the brain, we can cause you to be more trusting. And so we've closed the circle that, both factors happen. So anyway, I think, again, this is really big news because, as you said, now we have this biological reason to think, that people are really biased towards being cooperative and trusting, and now we know why. And of course, that opens another question, right? The next experiment, I'll let you get a word in here in a second, is, what inhibits this, what kind of ramps this up, and what ramps it down?
I was really fascinated by what you said, because what I really got from you is that when we give someone else trust, it actually releases oxytocin in their bodies. It actually makes them feel good.
Right. And so sometimes oxytocin called the love chemical because it motivates parents to care for offspring. In most mammals, just mothers, but in humans, mothers and fathers, to care for offspring, to love their offspring. So I think we ought to just open up and use the L word now. So it's like love. I can't force someone to love me, but I can give my love to somebody else, and hopefully that will be reciprocated. And so I think one of the beautiful things about the oxytocin research is that you have to be open and giving. Right? You can't force someone to release oxytocin. It's hard to manipulate people, although some people do that. But for most of us, you have to sort of give this freely. You have to trust someone and hope they're going to reciprocate. You have to be kind to someone. You have to be transparent, and then hope someone will do the same with you. And so you had asked in the questions you sent about your spouse and children, and that's the important part. So the brain circuit that utilizes oxytocin, I call the HOME circuit, HOME, and stands for Human Oxytocin Mediated Empathy Circuit. So this brain circuit, which uses oxytocin and a couple other neurochemicals, starts at home. It starts with the kind of nurturing behavior that many people in the world are blessed to get from their parents or other caregivers, where they are fed, they're shown love, they're shown affection, they're given safety. And what we've seen in studies of animals and studies we've done in sexually abused women is that if you don't have enough early childhood nurturing, or for that matter, food, the system tends not to develop very well. And about half the people we measure, they have a dysregulated oxytocin system, and they don't really connect to other people very well. So I think for parents, one of the take homes is your children are going to end up being whatever they're going to be, and what they really need from you is enough food and enough affection. And I don't think you can spoil children with too much affection. And for our spouses, the same thing. I think it's very important to make sure that this system is being utilized a lot. So we know from work in animals and a little work in humans that the more you induce oxytocin release, you lower the threshold for release. And so, in other words, the more you connect to people, the easier it is to connect to people. And it really starts at home. It starts with the people around you, the people who live in your household. And if you can connect to them, then in some sense your brain gives you the luxury of connecting to strangers as well. Again, not for everybody, and for individuals who suffer from a variety of psychiatric illnesses like autism and schizophrenia and social anxiety, the system is in many of them highly dysregulated. And we're involved, in my lab and a bunch of others are involved in clinical trials now, looking at oxytocin replacement therapy. But so far the results are very modest. Oxytocin replacement is not going to cure the system, again, because that home circuit in the brain has not developed properly or is not working properly.
I love your acronym of HOME and how it relates to the work that I do with couples and families, because it's about home and how important that is. Now, I'm curious, what are some things that parents can do that you know of that helps release oxytocin? Like, one I know is maybe giving trust to our children, giving trust to our spouse, or touch. Can you say anything else about that at all?
Sure. So the book More Molecule has a lot of applications. It's both the story of this sort of unlikely discovery of this chemical that drives so much of our behavior as human beings, but also really how you can use it to improve your life, your relationships, your happiness levels. So we've investigated a lot of ways that cause release of oxytocin. I'll just give you a couple. One, as you mentioned, is the role of touch. So we've shown in a laboratory study that touch will release oxytocin. Not only that, but oxytocin reduces anxiety and improves the immune system. So, as you know, social connections are strongly protective against early death and sickness. And so those social connections are strengthened through oxytocin release, and that tells our brains that the environment is safe and comfortable and relaxing. So touch, very important. As you know, Luis, I advocate 8 hugs a day. So if you're hugging 8 people a day, you're getting many chances for your brain to release oxytocin in others and have them reciprocate to you. So I don't know if people want to go as far as me. I actually refuse the handshake now, and I just hug everybody, even people I meet for the first time. But with children, again, touch is very important. So another example is I have little children, and so I started thinking about the timeout, which we use. And a timeout, to me, makes no sense at all. The timeout says, you're misbehaving, we don't want to be around you. So
I love it.
I invented the time in, and the time in says, you're having a really bad day, what you need is more attention. And so for my kids who are 9 and almost 13, They have to sit in my lap when they're, acting out for as many minutes as they are old and just make eye contact with me. So the beautiful thing about this is the 9-year-old loves it. It's very calming for her. And the 13-year-old is scared to death that I'll do this when her friends are over. So, it works both ways.
No, I love it.
Yeah. So I think, again, having the language of oxytocin and the need to connect um, does help us think about that as a priority. Again, because these systems that utilize oxytocin are so evolutionarily old, they're way outside our conscious awareness. So if we become aware of them, and we can talk about ways that you and I have done that, once we become aware of them, then we can be more conscious of utilizing oxytocin to strengthen those relationships. And it's relationships that make us happy. So I'll say one more thing, and I'll let you get a question in. One of the punchlines from the book is a study we ran last year in which we've shown that people who release the most oxytocin when they're trusted are in fact happier. And they're happier because they have better relationships of all types. Better romantic relationships, more close friends, closer to family, and they're even kinder to strangers in our laboratory task, money sharing task. So it is possible to build the kind of world that sounds like the world I want to live in and you want to live in, which is very connected, very caring, very loving, just by taking the chance of reaching out and showing someone you trust them, showing someone you care about them, even strangers.
Yeah. One of the things I definitely want to live in a world where there's more people willing to extend generosity, show each other care. In your book, you shared a story about a man who had a seizure and fell off a bridge onto a train track, and another man who saw this had his two daughters, and he ran up to a stranger, said, "Here, watch my daughters," jumped down and held the man down who was having a seizure while the oncoming train came, and held him down so that his head wouldn't pop up or his body wouldn't pop up and get hit by the train. And honestly, that brought tears to me. I mean, it was just amazing, that type of care for another person. And I know that when he was interviewed, he said, "I did it because I didn't want my daughters to see this." And again, that just really touched me too. Like, what a powerful drive for humans to love each other, to care about each other. And yes, that is the type of world I want. I also really, really want to congratulate you for sharing your thing about your daughters, your time in. I really love that. What a creative technique, because oftentimes, the time out to me just seems like such a harsh way to treat children. And also in my studies, I've read that one of the worst things that we do to humans is ignore them. That's the worst thing that we do. I mean, in jails, the worst thing that they can do to a prisoner is put them in solitary confinement. So to put a kid on timeout is essentially almost kind of doing the same thing. So I love your idea. And another thing that you said is about human connection and how important that human connection is, and that kindness, that generosity. In your studies, one of the things that you did is you studied rituals, and you looked at the effects of how rituals really increases people's levels of oxytocin, connection, and even connection to something bigger. Even people that said that they were atheists at the end said, "I feel connected to something more bigger than me." Can you tell me a little bit about ritual and the effect it has upon oxytocin levels and connection?
Sure. And so, in the book, I discuss my own background being raised Catholic by actually a former nun. And so the Catholic ritual was a really big part of my life as an altar boy. And then I kind of rejected this top-down morality where, it's sort of a thou shalt not. And I think that fueled my search for an underlying biological basis for morality. Again, it's not my place to say whether God exists or not. I think that's a question of faith and a personal question. And I can't solve that scientifically. So anyway, so I avoided the ritual question for quite a while. And then I finally came to terms with, well, I really need to assess, why we have all these rituals besides just religious ones. So as you said, we've done studies in churches. We've brought in religious people into our lab to worship. We've studied other aspects of ritual that don't involve religion, like folk dances, singing. We've even looked at indigenous rituals. So last year I was in the highlands of Papua New Guinea in a rainforest with subsistence farmers and took blood before and after a ritual that they run for thousands of years, a ritual dance in their village. And indeed, for the people in Papua New Guinea, for those in churches, for those who come into our lab, those who are dancing, about 60% of those who participate in the ritual will get a release of oxytocin. After that release, they feel closer to their community, and they also feel closer to people in general. We don't find that even among religious believers that oxytocin makes people feel closer to God or some ultimate reality. So again, whatever generates that connection doesn't seem to utilize oxytocin as far as we can tell. But I think the rituals are valuable because they do bring us into community. They remind us of how important community is. And as social creatures, as you said, we need community. And so because of that, even for people who say don't go to church, they can design their own rituals that are important. So last week I was in Boston and I spoke at the Harvard Humanist Chaplaincy, which is a group of agnostics and atheists who have developed a Sunday ritual where they come together and they spend some time meditating and they spend time in community talking about things that are important to them and how to live fulfilled and happy lives. And I was very happy to speak to them. And then next month I'm speaking at an Episcopal church in Pasadena. So to me, all this runs on a continuum, and there's no right way or wrong way to induce the release of oxytocin and feel connected to others. I think rituals do that powerfully, and again, because they're so ancient, as in the people in Papua New Guinea, many rituals have evolved to be excellent at invoking oxytocin release. So a couple of years ago, for example, I was in an evangelical church in New York City, and an absolutely powerful service, and I started crying during it. It was just a really amazing blend of music, of movement, of connection, opportunities to volunteer to help others, and it was absolutely beautiful. So again, whatever works for individuals, I think more connection is good.
Connection is such a powerful piece of making a good society, making good family homes. It's just such a vital piece.
Right.
And one of the things that you talked about in this one of the gatherings that you went to with agnostics and secular people was that they get together and they do meditations. Now I know that in one of your research experiments you did some work with meditators. You had them do mindfulness meditation and a metta meditation. My understanding of a mindfulness meditation is maybe focusing on the breath, focusing on what you hear right now, sensations in the body, very kind of present meditation, where a metta meditation really focuses on thinking about somebody that you care about and wishing wellness upon them and seeing them happy and kind of feeling what they might feel as they become happier and are blessed. Can you tell me a little bit about these two types of meditations and what your findings were?
Right, yeah, you're exactly right. So this sort of mindfulness meditation is focusing on one's internal state and calming the mind and slowing the breathing. Where metta is a very interesting. Metta translates to loving kindness. So it's feeling love towards people who are close to you, and then beginning to expand that circle out, so that you can feel love or care for someone you work with, and maybe a stranger that you met. The person who served your coffee at Starbucks. And then at the sort of highest level, it would be feeling care or love towards someone who's difficult, who isn't the easiest person to get along with. So it is an interesting technique. So we actually trained people in both types, people who had never meditated, and we found that the impact of oxytocin release was stronger. Sorry, we found that the behavioral impact was stronger among the metta group. That is, those who focused on love ended up being more generous, more trustworthy after 6 weeks of this training than those who didn't. And we also imaged their brains to find out, why we see this behavioral difference, and had people actually meditate in an MRI scanner. And we found that there was this reduction in activity of areas that focus on self and an increase in areas that in the brain that lets focus on others. And so I think this focus on others is very important. Um, you had asked me your questions whether I meditate, and um, I thought this was a great opportunity. We're hiring these meditation teachers to teach these participants in experiments to meditate, and I thought I should go to this. It's free. I'm paying for it for my grant, but I can get trained for free. And it was 6 weeks for the training, and I have to admit I went to absolutely none of those. I didn't go to a single one because it was a Saturday, and I work a lot of hours during the week, and Saturday is kind of my family day, and Saturday and Sunday, and I just didn't feel I wanted to be away from my children. So I don't personally meditate. I do pray, which I find helps me connect to others and helps me remember that there's so little in my life that I'm in control of. That something outside myself is happening. Is impacting what I'm doing every day, and I should recognize that and not think like I can control every aspect of my life. What I can control is my own, my own state, my own energy and optimism, and I can pass it on to those around me. And I think remembering that is a very useful part of this ritual.
I really commend you on making a good choice about spending time with your family. I think it really shows your commitment to your family, and I think that spending time with your children is a meditation. You're blessing them, you're really spending some time to connect with them and bond with them and give them the role of a father and being present for that. And there's so much research out there showing that, moms have a certain role and they impart a certain lovingness to children, and fathers also impart certain characteristics and attributes that moms may not be able to do as well. Now, I know that in your research, I kind of wanted to talk about something that kind of startled me a little bit when I read your book. You did some research with women that had been abused, and I know that what you found is they had irregular releases of oxytocin, tended to be untrusting, and didn't want to reciprocate. Can you tell me just a little bit about that research?
Right. So as I said earlier, this brain system needs to be used to function properly, and so individuals who are under a lot of stress when their children are abused or abandoned, oftentimes this brain circuit doesn't develop properly. So about 50% of the ones we've studied. It does mean that 50% of the individuals are resilient to the abuse, and that resilience was not associated with the degree or length of the abuse. So I think what's interesting for patients who are watching is that there does seem to be some innate resilience across individuals. We've connected that to some particular genes that may confer resiliency. But it also means that they're going to see lots of variations across individuals who have suffered these kinds of childhoods. And let me say, Luis, you can't study or work in neuroscience without having a lot of toleration for individual differences. So, even within ourselves, our brains are changing over time, our behavior's changing. And so, for these individuals, I think the important thing is to be supportive. Obviously, therapy is very important, and understanding that not everyone can get better at the same rate, and some people may never get better. The abuse may be too severe, and I do relate a story in the book of one woman in our study. So there are multiple parts of this. We measure oxytocin release, we image their brains, we genotype them, and we were calling her back for her brain imaging part of her study, and she had died. She was 21 years old.
Wow.
So probably suicide. So a lot of depression in this group, a lot of borderline personality disorder. So again, I think it's, for family members, for friends, it's important to be supportive and to understand that these individuals, their brains are just not working the same as ours, and we can't expect it to be that way. Let me give you one more example. So use of even moderate-term use of stimulants like methamphetamine and cocaine can damage oxytocin receptors in the brain. And so you see a lot of comorbid depression in individuals who are long-term drug users. and they often don't draw on the kind of social support that family members and friends can offer them. Not because I think they don't want it, because they may not actually have the physical ability to sustain those kinds of connections. And again, it doesn't mean that friends and family shouldn't keep trying and shouldn't be as supportive as possible. It just means you may not get that reciprocal oxytocin release from the patient. They just may not have, the ability in their brains to be as reciprocal as we would like them to be. And it's awfully hard. I mean, patients I've seen with these disorders, sometimes they're not so nice to be around. Sometimes they're not grateful. Sometimes they don't say thank you. But it doesn't mean that we should not stop trying to help them. And when you as you see patients, you can get bonked in the head in the wrong place, and all of a sudden your personality changes radically, and you're a totally different person. And so, if that were us, we of course would like our loved ones to help us, to stay around us, and not abandon us. So I think as much as possible, we should try to do the same for people who are around us who are suffering.
I think about my dad, because I was actually adopted when I was 8, and I was highly abused as a child, and that's kind of what startled me about your research. But I know that I'm somebody that has made a really phenomenal transformation, based on where I came from, and my first 8 years, which are really kind of the most impactful time of your life. And I've had some really, really gracious parents, a really supportive father and mom, and just the whole family. But my dad, he's the one who raised me the most, and the amount of patience that he's shown me as I went through my teenage years, kind of putting out all that aggression that I had from my childhood. And you're right. I mean, that type of compassion that he showed me really helped me make the changes that I've made and become who I am today. And you're right. I mean, it really does call upon us to be considerate of others when we know that maybe they've been abused, and how helpful I think therapy is too, or counseling or coaching and community. And that's what I really love about your work, is it mixes science and just real life stuff. Science is often thought of something that's real heady and kind of out there, but what you're doing is you're mixing science and saying, here's science, and here is people living their everyday life, and here's how the two mix together. I love that.
Thank you so much. It's very kind of you to say that.
So I just have a few questions, and then I think that we can end our conversation. I also wanted to know about, what are some things that people can do when they're overly stressed that might help them calm and relax and maybe raise their oxytocin levels. I think we've mentioned a few already. I just kind of wanted to reiterate for people that stress levels do have an impact on our ability to produce oxytocin and happiness and the love hormone. And what are some things that people can do that will help them reduce the stress and increase the oxytocin?
Great question. So, turns out that a little bit of stress is good for oxytocin release and brings us together. So, people exercising together, we've shown release oxytocin, dancing, as I mentioned. The saying "misery loves company." Sometimes what you need is company. You need someone to be around you and to be there to support you. But so oxytocin is a social molecule, so you need social contact. We have found, for example, that using social media of all types is a good stress reducer. So if you are a little stressed out and you don't have someone around you, posting on Facebook, tweeting out to your friends, emailing, pretty good. Some studies from a different lab have shown that talking to a loved one on the phone actually will release oxytocin. So, I think recognizing that you're stressed and reaching out to others is really important. And then finding productive ways to burn off that stress. Exercise, taking a walk, meditating, praying. Again, often we found better in a group than by oneself. So even with professional Buddhist monks, people with 10,000 or more hours of meditation training, individuals who are really joyful and very present. I asked a group recently that I was visiting, why they still meditate as a group. Look, you guys are pros. Why not just do it in your room? And I said, meditation's hard. It's hard to have the discipline to really reach down inside you and have this sense of calmness and connection. And when you have other people around you doing it, it's a bit easier. Um, so I think the punchline here is any connection is good connection, or almost any connection is good connection. Even things like petting a dog will release oxytocin. So, finding opportunities to do that. Go to a coffee shop, chat with the person next to you. I mean, I think for people who, need a break, this is important. Even, I should say, even retail therapy has some biological basis. So if you go shopping, you're going to chat with that salesperson. Again, don't spend the home mortgage on shopping, but going out and getting a coffee and do some shopping at the mall and chat with the salespeople. I mean, all that actually can give people a mood lift, and it's not just the stuff you're getting; it's that you're around the humans, and so that's what we really need. As you said, we don't need to be isolated. So anyway, and obviously, getting off the couch is very important as well. So if people are stressed or down, sitting there watching TV is not going to solve it. Even though you may feel wiped out, take a walk. Take the dog out around the block a couple times. I think there's a variety of ways you can do it, and much more in the book.
Your book is really phenomenal, and I want to mention to people again that the book is The Moral Molecule, and if they're interested in getting it, it is available at Barnes & Nobles. It's available online at many different online stores. It's a fantastic book. I, gathered a lot of information for it. I just kind of wanted to recap some of the stuff that you said and what impact your research has had upon me and what I've gathered from you too. One thing that I've heard from you today is, the power of hugging, that your research found that 8 hugs a day helps people feel happier. You also mentioned that when people come into your office, you ask them, what can I do to make your visit most enjoyable and most beneficial? I really love that question. What a wonderful way to start off a visit with somebody that comes into your office. Is there anything else that you're doing that maybe you can recap for people that your research has kind of really helped you say, hey, I want to make these changes in my life. I'm going to add these, implement these, because I know that it just makes my life better?
Yeah, so I really, as the book recounts, changed my whole life because of my research. And part of that is really focusing on individuals. So we have a rule I instituted in my family, which is when we're out doing something, we have no electronics. We want to be really present for the people around us. And we want to see activities together as adventures. So I like the word adventure a lot. So we're going to have every weekend is a time for an adventure. And let's see this as us being together as a family, having an adventure. And so again, that's a good oxytocin stimulator. And then recounting when we get back, that night or the next day about the adventure we have, enjoying reliving that is great. But I think, one of the easiest things people can do is being transparent. And so, I certainly have a rule with my wife of complete transparency and with people around me. You can look at my email, you can look at my phone, you can, whatever you want, it's all available. And,
wow.
And so, for the people I work with, for example, I want them to know exactly, they know how much I get paid, they know, where the grants come from, where the money comes from that pays them. And it really simplifies your life if you just say, look, this research project is running out and we're behind schedule and I don't have any more money to pay you. And, I'd love you if you can keep working on it because we're almost done. And, that's a hard thing. That's a hard conversation if you don't keep people tuned into what's going on. So, by the way, many businesses are doing this as well, and nonprofit organizations. It's sort of radical transparency because it's so easy to trust someone who is completely open with you. And so, again, if you want someone to trust you, you have to be trustworthy. And the easiest way to do that is to be very transparent. And also, I think, own up to your mistakes. So, again, the book gives people kind of a new language to understand the people around them and social relationships. And instead of saying, I don't know, Luis, I'm sure you're a wonderful guy. Even you occasionally, grump at people. Instead of you grump at me once, just saying, Lisa, he's a terrible guy. So I can say, oh, look, normally he's a great, connecting, loving person, and now he's stressed out. And so instead of saying, oh, you're a bad person, I should say, oh, you're probably stressed. You're inhibiting your oxytocin release, and what do you need from me? What can I do to help you? So even as a leader of a lab, I'm much more open to the sort of empathy channel. So it's empathy that people report feeling when their brains release oxytocin. So there's valuable information there. If you can pick up people's emotional states, then you can be much more effective as a human being, as a leader, as a spouse, as a parent. And so I think, embracing empathy and love is not squishy in any sense. It's actually part of our human makeup, and it's extraordinarily powerful. So I've just ceased to be concerned to ask the question, are you okay? May I help you? Is there something I can do to make your world a better place? And I think asking that question, people open up right away. And again, almost everybody reciprocates. Those who don't, there are that couple of percent who don't. They have many of the attributes of psychopaths. And, there's no cure for psychopathology, for at least severe psychopathology. So, there are some individuals who are just dangerous. And I think, for listeners, it's 1 or 2% of the world. And, you do have to be vigilant for these folks. And, you don't want to be so open that you, risk your health or your life or your wealth. But having said that, almost everybody in a safe setting will reciprocate. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So if you want to be loved, give love. If you want to be trusted, give trust.
One of the things that I really want to point out to listeners who have families or couples is you said that you have a no electronics policy and that every weekend you guys go out and have a little adventure. And I love that. In the work that I teach couples to make it a point to have dates, to schedule dates, family dates, couple dates, and put it down on a calendar and say, hey, we're going to go out and nothing is going to get in the way of this. One of the things that I've seen is that when couples go out, I used to work at a restaurant, I would see couples from time to time with their cell phones in the middle of the table. And I just thought that was the oddest thing. They're having a nice dinner, but their cell phone was right there so they could see it. And I love your idea of, no electronics, this is our time together, and this is our time to connect, and we can connect with the outer world later, but right now it's us. I love that. That's really empowering to couples to say, hey, we can have an awesome relationship if we make it a priority. And what I'm hearing from you is it's really a priority to you. And speaking to you, you're just a really inspiring person. Thank you so much, Paul. In the time that I've spoken with you, I've really gotten some ideas for myself about some things that I want to go out and do today, and some things that I want to say to people about making myself even more transparent and, just showing a little bit more honesty. I just really thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you would like to say in closing, or any hopes that you have for your book or your research? Anything else that you would like to say?
Yeah, you had asked me in the email in which we talked about this interview, if it's having an impact. And I think the longer I do this, the more I'm comfortable kind of taking off my scientist hat and putting on my human hat and just say, look, this is about human behavior and being an advocate for understanding that our human behavior is one of needed connection. And for individuals who don't get that, they're going to be unhappy. And so we can actually create this world that we want to live in, a world of happiness, a world of connection. Again, not every second of the day, not for every person, but by and large, we can do that. And nice data in the book showing, in fact, that countries that have been able to do this have high trust, have lots of prosperity, have a lot of happiness. And so I think there is a real way to build this kind of world that we want to live in. So I'm very optimistic about the humans. I think we're a lot better than we get credit for.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for your time. Have an awesome day. Good luck with your meeting. Thank you.